everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Victoria Hahn, and I'm one of the medical science liaisons here at Nutra. And today I am super pleased to present to you this talk sponsored by Nutra, and it will be in essence presented by James LaValle. James LaValle is our esteemed speaker today, and he is an industry expert and educator, as well as the author of numerous books, articles, and databases, including the book Your Blood Never Lies. He's also a clinical pharmacist and board-certified clinical nutritionist with over 30 years worth of experience in wellness prevention and health management. So with that being said, I'll pass the mic on over to James LaValle. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Victoria. Today we're going to talk about fasting mimic diets and the science and application of them. And I just want to be clear on this disclaimer that it's not intended for distribution. It's provided for the use of physicians and other healthcare professionals only, and is intended to be used as a basis for determining whether or not to recommend the product to their patients. This medical and scientific information is not for use by consumers. The products offered by Nutra are not intended for the use by consumers as a means to cure, treat, prevent, or mitigate any disease or other medical condition. Once again, presentation not intended for distribution. It contains statements that have not been evaluated by the FDA. FMDs are not designed to diagnose, treat, or cure, or prevent diseases. So let's get started. So fasting, obviously, it's the hottest topic out there. I don't know, it doesn't matter what patient comes into our practice. We hear it all the time. I'm doing a 16-8. I'm doing a 12-12. I'm doing a 5-2, fast. So fasting's been a part of evolutionary history across all organisms. Fasting is a part of traditions across cultures in time. And fasting is or was practiced by 5 major religions. And then what happened with the evolution of modern farming and plentiful farming and food is that fasting was replaced by patterns of uninterrupted daily food intake. But now we're seeing that fasting has returned. And when you look at the category, I mean, it's being driven obviously by consumer demand. People are looking for options for how to eat, how to improve their diet. And if you look, fasting mimic science helped drive fasting to the #1 category in diet and nutrition in the United States, both in 2018 and 2020. In 2019, intermittent fasting took a second place to clean eating. But clean eating took a second place to intermittent fasting in the year 2020. And if you look, the number of Americans that are following a diet in 2020 has increased from the prior year. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence that's emerging on fasting and intermittent fasting. So, meal timing and frequency, the implication for cardiovascular disease prevention. This was in the American Heart Association scientific statement in the journal Circulation in 2017. Then in 2019, in the New England Journal of Medicine, the effects of intermittent fasting on health, aging, and disease. So not only is fasting on the minds of consumers and people are looking for that information, but there's clinically validated information that's being published that relates to restriction times of eating, as well as intermittent fasting to help promote health and metabolic health. So, what is fasting? The most common definition of fasting is it's the abstinence from all or some kinds of food and drink. The physiologic definition of fasting is the switching from burning glucose for energy to burning fatty acids and ketones as a main source of fuel, which can be considered a more efficient use of energy. And then the molecular definition of fasting is the absence of triggers of nutrient sensing pathways. And that also is equivalent to the stimulation of stress resistance. And we'll get into this in just a little bit as to what that means. So when you go from the fed state to the fasted state, there are a lot of different things that start to occur. So, glucose and fat are your body's main sources of fuel. If glucose isn't available, fat is metabolized as fuel to spare protein. 12 to 24 hours of fasting can lead to production of fat-derived ketone bodies and free fatty acids that are used as energy. And if you look at this, you can see that protein and urea can go up in the third phase of fasting. You look at glycogen stores going down, right? As you're getting rid of your glucose because of fasting, your glycogen pools, which are stored glucose, get utilized. And then we see with fasting an improvement in metabolic rate as we move through the phases of fasting. So there are a lot of different components to your metabolism that start to shift when you begin to fast. And of course, the research or background on water fasting and what happens, the adaptive response to fasting. And of course, these changes have not been verified fully by FMD. But when we look at water fasting, we see an improvement in parasympathetic tone. Personally, I find that incredibly important for individuals because I find a lot of people in our practice stuck in sympathetic dominance, which can lead to things like blood pressure changes. You get a reduction in heart rate, a reduction in blood pressure, an improvement in heart rate variability, which is kind of heart rate responsiveness. You get improvement in fat lipolysis, which means you break fat down. You get an improvement in a term known as autophagy, which is the eating up of waste proteins, which we're going to visit later in the talk. And then in addition to that, we get a downregulation in mTOR, and we'll go through that and explain that as well. Stress resistance goes up, and that's incredibly important because the stress resistance phenomena is actually what starts to trigger these changes in metabolic health that we're looking to achieve with individuals. We get an energy uptake, you get a decrease in that through the GI tract, you get a decrease in what's known as cell proliferation. So as your mTOR goes down, you're not signaling as much cell growth. And then, of course, in the liver, you get an improvement in glycogenolysis, and which, of course, is that release of glycogen and the depletion of glycogen. You get a decrease in IGF-1, which, of course, correlates to that decrease in cell proliferation. And then, probably most notably, what people notice is that, hey, my brain feels clearer. They get an enhanced network plasticity, meaning that the neurons are operating more efficiently and the brain is communicating more efficiently. So when we look at fasting, when you have dietary restrictions, so you look at high good fats, low protein, low carbs, or specific types of carbs, when they're looked at in combination, they were studied for their ability to nourish the body while creating a fasting state, while at the same time not triggering three key nutrient sensing pathways. So what this is discussing is the fact that taking in certain macronutrients could mimic the effect of fasting and enhance the stress resistance effect. When you look at this, you see a downregulation of mTOR, you see a downregulation of the PI3K pathway, and then, of course, the PKA pathway. So the PKA pathway is the carbohydrate pathway, the IGF-1 pathway, of course, is the protein pathway, and the mTOR pathway is the amino acid pathway. So, the purpose of this is to look at how can we begin to model particular food intakes that could affect the stress resistance mechanism in the body. So how's fasting work? Well, obviously, when you're getting a normal diet of protein, sugars, and carbohydrates, we activate IGF-1, we activate insulin, and then we can increase PKA activity, and we also upregulate mTOR. And that actually is related to cellular aging and growth when it's left in an uncontrolled way. With fasting or using fasting mimic diet, that's where we create a lower protein, low sugar, and lower carbohydrate intake for a period of time, which then restricts IGF-1, downregulates mTOR, inhibits PKA, which is that carbohydrate pathway, downregulates insulin need, and that triggers that stress resistance capacity. And of course, when we look at those different pathways, we see that the pathway on the right will trigger a healthy aging process where unrestricted food intake, high protein, high sugar, high carbs, and excessive food intake and unrestricted eating leads to an unhealthy aging process. So one of the most important aspects of this, at least from my perspective, when I'm working with people and utilizing fasting mimic diet, is this process known as autophagy. And autophagy is where you have organelles within your cell, like the mitochondria, as well as misfolded protein. And misfolded proteins are a lot of times caused by just aging or metabolic stress. And they need to be targeted for destruction, meaning that we need to clean up our cells. So you can think of, we have processes in our body that act as a more or less a vacuum cleaner, right? We're cleaning up waste. It's the body's way of cleaning house. It recycles the cellular debris. And why this is important is all that cellular debris can relate to inflammation, changes in immune function, and also in terms of the benefit of autophagy is cellular rejuvenation. And of course, one of the major ways that you trigger autophagy is by prolonged fasting. And of course, this is Nobel Prize winning work that was done by Dr. Ashumi on the discovery of the mechanisms for autophagy. And you have to remember that autophagy is kind of the sister signaling to a process or compound in your body called inflammasomes. So when autophagy is not intact, we get more inflammasome activity. And so this is a really important concept to keep in mind. So not all fasting is the same. We have intermittent fasting. It's less than 2 days. So you get time-restricted eating. And time-restricted eating, there's all sorts of times that are out there right now. You hear of 16-8, meaning 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of feeding time, or circadian eating of 12-12. Basically, basically after dinner until breakfast, you're not eating. And then, of course, there's the intermittent fast of the 5-2, where on 5 days a week, you're eating at a normal diet. Hopefully that normal diet is one that's including lots of vegetables and fresh foods and not necessarily a lot of refined foods or excessive sugar or carbohydrate intake. And then the other 2 days, you either fast or you restrict your calories, if you're a woman, to 500 calories and a man to 600 calories. And then, of course, there's the alternate day fast, or every other day you would fast. A lot of these have been out there and popularized, and everybody reports different successes in the way that they do these. And of course, the prolonged fasting or periodic fasting, one that's more than 2 days, there could be the water fast or just fasting with water alone, or the use of the fasting mimicking diet, which is basically fasting with food, getting the metabolic effects of fasting with food. So prolonged water fasting has its challenges, and I have to be honest, I don't recommend prolonged water fasting to individuals unless they're in a facility where they can be watched or tracked. I think that it has a lot of challenges for individuals. First of all, it's adherence. Am I going to be able to do 4 to 5 days of water fast? Safety is an issue. We have a lot of people that are dysglycemic, meaning they have disorders of how they process their glucose, and therefore they could be sensitive to it. They could get lightheaded, hypoglycemic. And of course, you look to the right, you see all of the issues around the challenges that are associated with prolonged fasting. You could initiate gallstones. You could have dehydration issues. You could cause low blood pressure. I already talked about hypoglycemia. There's some concern over loss of muscle mass. Nutrient deficiencies, especially in people that are already maybe functionally deficient in their nutrients, it can push them to a full deficiency. And of course, hunger. So this is a pretty big area where this is a major challenge for individuals. And what we have seen is Dr. Longo, who is a biochemist and cell biologist and the director of longevity at the Institute the director of longevity at USC. He really did pioneering work on bridging the important pathways that are now widely recognized to regulate aging and age-related chronic diseases. And then he applied that knowledge to develop the first diet that mimics fasting. And really just revolutionary work. And I know from applying this type of technology into clinical practice, it's been gratifying. So how was it developed? So 20 plus years of research and development. There was foundational preclinical work. There was completed existing and pending clinical trials. That was all done at the University of Southern California, the Buck Institute, and the University of Genoa, and at IFOM. $48 million in total research grants to develop FMD. $36 million from the National Institutes of Health and the European Union for Aging, Fasting, and FMD research, and then $12 million of additional funding for FMD clinical trials. So there's a tremendous amount of clinical research that has gone into the exact or the specific way of doing fasting mimicking diet. So this is kind of how the program works. There are two different fasting mimicking diet applications. One to the left, known as ProLon, which is a consumer-based product, and then the ProLon Professional, which is geared for in use by healthcare professionals and physicians. And we're going to go through the two of them and discuss where they're similar and where they're different. And so fasting with food using ProLon FMD. It's a periodic 5-day structured meal plan. When we say periodic, that means that we apply it every so often. And it's important to understand that these are unique nutrient ratios to deliver the benefits of a prolonged fast. So I've had people try this, like, oh, I just tried to mimic it myself. It's very specific in the nutrients that were researched to be able to deliver the benefits of a prolonged fast through the ability to eat this structured way. It's scientifically formulated, all plant-based ingredients that mimic fasting, and it provides nutrients to avoid malnourishment, and it's been demonstrated to be safe in over 220,000 user experiences, and the safety profile has been carefully tracked. So what's the composition of ProLon? So if you look at the difference between the two, one of the important things to realize is that during these 5 days, you have a significant protein restriction, and you need to have that protein restriction because it helps to turn off that nutrient sensing piece and allow for that stress resistance chemistry to kick in. So on the professional side, there's low inulin, lower in grains, and no nightshades that are in the ingredients of the ProLon Professional kit. Both have nutritious nut-based fats, omega-3 fatty acids, as you can see, 44 to 46% content. The complex carbs and fiber make up 43 to 47% of the program. And then you have a mild caloric restriction. So when you look at this, between 700 and 1,100 calories per day, and that goes over a 5-day period. It's vegetarian, it's gluten and lactose free. And then it also provides micronutrients along with a glycerol that is applied in the drink. So you add a glycerol drink diluted with water that you'll drink during the 2nd through 5th days of the fast. And of course, all of the ingredients are plant-based. And if you look in the professional product, you have 83 ingredients, and the consumer product, you have 73 ingredients. So what are the key features and highlights and differences? So the original ProLon that everyone's grown to love, that, we've been using it for several years. It's been available since 2016. There's a wide variety of soups, both in version 1 and 2. Tomato, minestrone, minestrone quinoa, vegetable, mushroom, butternut squash quinoa, white bean spinach, and black bean. There's fewer ingredients than in the professional version. I will just make a note. Please follow the directions if you're using the ProLon kits for your practitioners or for your patients. Make sure they follow the instructions on how to properly reconstitute the soups. It'll help them taste delicious, and the ingredients are fantastic, so they'll be very satisfied with the taste profile. Key features, once again, no nightshades. So, it excludes tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, and bell pepper. Many times there are practitioners that are working with some people who may have nightshade issues. So this was a welcome change for the professional kit. It also has reduced inulin, so plant-based chicory root fiber, and it reduced grains. Also important because there are some individuals that are dealing with certain types of intestinal issues where inulin may be an issue. So this is, once again, a fantastic change for the professional kit. There's a new vegan dark chocolate tablet that is included in the professional kit that actually helps with the saturated fat ratios. So that's in it. And then 5 entirely new soup flavors that have fewer processed ingredients. And once again, there are 83 ingredients in the ProLon professional kit versus the traditional ProLon kit. So once again, the key difference is that both support prolonged fasting. The original kit, 9 soup flavors, 2 ProLon varieties, fewer ingredients. The professional kit, fewer processed ingredients for the soups, no nightshades, reduced inulin, reduced grains, and of course, a daily dark chocolate square. So what's the 5-day journey of ProLon? So, when you start on day 1, you're entering a fasted state. So your body transitions into that fasted state and into a fat burning mode to begin that process of cellular cleanup. On day 2, that fat burning actually ramps up, and that's because we get more ketogenesis or ketone production. And by the end of this day, typically at 48 hours, ketosis can start to occur. And once again, it says it may occur. On day 3, that is when in my opinion, the magic starts to really happen, because we get the cellular cleanup, the autophagy begins. Fat burning and ketone production and utilization continues and increases. But most importantly, that day 3 starts to trigger autophagy. On day 4, you continue to get that cellular cleaning. Remember the cleanup of the misfolded proteins, the organelles that may have waste materials in them. And then there also continues to be this rejuvenation effect, and you're burning fat and ketosis continues. And then the day 5, you get sustained cellular recycling, rejuvenation, and renewal, as well as sustained ketosis. And then day 6 and beyond, you nourish your body by breaking the fast. I do want to just recommend that on day 6, it doesn't mean people go back to having cheeseburgers and French fries. You want them to ease back into their diet, having soups, steamed vegetables, lean protein, but a healthy diet on day 6 will really help with the continuation of the positive effects. So what's the big difference between FMD and a ketogenic diet, for example? So, obviously, with the FMD diet, it's 5 days. It's high good fats, low in protein and low in sugar. In a ketogenic diet, high in good fats, normal protein, very low in carbs. The duration can be several weeks to months on a ketogenic diet. In terms of fasting, it's designed on the FMD side to mimic the physiologic and cellular effect of fasting. On the ketogenic side, it's designed to mimic physiologic fasting. With fasting initiation, it's fast. It can be time dependent on ketogenic, so you may not get into that area of your metabolism as quickly. The cellular effects are rejuvenation with the fasting mimic diet. And with the ketogenic diet, the cells are less likely to sense nutrients, but they're likely to still sense those nutrients, which means if you continue to turn on nutrient sensing, you do not get that stress resistance effect that we're looking for in order to initiate autophagy. Lean body mass, there's protection on the FMD side. That's been reported in the clinical studies. and then it's protein dependent on the ketogenic side. What's the positioning of these diets? Well, for the FMD diet, or fasting mimicking diet, it's weight, metabolic health, and aging. For the ketogenic diet, it's mainly weight and metabolic. And of course, we've read a lot about in the clinical trials about the neurologic benefits of a ketogenic diet. So let's go through the science of FMD. This is so ProLon is actually the first to market fasting mimic diet with clinical trials on aging, longevity, and metabolic health. Truly breakthrough discoveries published in top scientific and medical journals. This is in the Science and Translational Medicine. This is a research article, fasting mimic diets and markers and risk factors for aging, diabetes, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. We're going to go through this, but basically you'll see that the science and research shows that fasting mimicking diet helps to target some of the key biomarkers related to aging, diabetes, cancer, and cardiovascular disease, and is targeted for metabolic health. So when you look at ProLon Professional, this study design was healthy individuals undergoing 3-month cycles of ProLon, and of course the anthropometrics were measured: weight loss, decreased BMI, abdominal fat reduction, and lean body mass retention. So when you look at body weight, the control actually went up just the slightest bit. The fasting mimicking diet group, with an inclusion of 39 individuals, lost an average of 5.73 pounds. Their BMI went down an average of 0.9, which, with a p-value of 0.0001, this is very accurate. The trunk fat went down significantly in the fasting mimic diet. And then lean body mass actually was retained or improved. So FMD showed a improvement in lean body mass, or at least there, and in addition to that, no loss of lean body mass. And in terms of metabolic balance and healthy aging, we look at IGF-1. IGF-1 levels went down an average of 21.7 points, which is related to healthy aging and longevity. And then, of course, for metabolic balance, and blood pressure is incredibly important as a marker for this, we saw an average of 4.5 points systolic blood pressure going down while doing the fasting mimic diet. And then this study showed healthy individuals going through 3 monthly cycles of ProLon and looking at everything from glucose, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, and C-reactive protein. So as you look, BMI, this is the post hoc analysis of participants that were segmented by marker levels. So if you notice, depending on BMI at less than 25, 25 to 30, or greater than 30, we see in people with the greatest BMI, the most significant BMI reduction of a BMI of 1.4 reduction, and people in the category of 25 to 30, which would be considered overweight, of a 0.7 BMI shift. And then when we go over to IGF-1, and people with IGF-1s greater than 225, a very significant drop of 55.1, whereas people that are at an IGF-1 of less than 225, a reduction of 14.1. And then looking at fasting glucose, once again, in people with abnormal glucose is greater than 99, we see an 11.8 reduction in glucose level from baseline. And then as we move across, when we look at blood pressure, so blood pressure, systolic blood pressures that were less than 120, there's a modest drop of 2.4, but yet still a drop. But more significantly, people with a blood pressure, systolic blood pressure greater than 120, a 6.7 drop in their systolic blood pressure. Likewise, when you look at diastolic blood pressure, once again, in diastolic blood pressure greater than 80, we saw a significant drop in 5.5 points. And in individuals with a systolic blood pressure of less than 80, which is generally recognized as healthy, there was a 1.5 point drop. You look at total cholesterol, people greater than 199 saw a 19.9 point drop in their cholesterol. And of course, people with more normal cholesterol at under 199 it dropped 6.1 points. And as you follow through with this, likewise, the more disordered the value, so once again, on the LDL cholesterol, that being high, it was a significant drop of 14.9. HDL cholesterol dropping insignificantly on the people that had less than 50, and then people with greater than 50 LDLs showed a slight drop of 4 points. And then C-reactive protein showing an actual drop, a negative of 1.7 after 5 days of fasting mimic diet. That's incredible. So 5 days, 3 months in a row, 5 days on, 25-day break, 5 days on, fasting mimic diet, 25-day break. You see a 1.7 point drop on C-reactive protein. So once again, in terms of the safety, not associated at all with any dangerous drops in biomarkers, and in fact, showed positive trends in all of these biomarkers. So what's interesting on this is that you hold on to these changes. So a significant sustained impact on fasting mimic diet cycles after 3 months after the 3 FMD cycle. So if you look at this, individuals held on to basically 60% of their waist circumference improvement after 3 months after they had finished their last cycle. Same thing with their systolic blood pressure. They still enjoyed that 55% retention, body weight 64% retention, and of course BMI at a 71% retention. This is significant. This is just doing 3 cycles of fasting mimicking diet and then getting the lasting metabolic health effect over the next 3 months. So with ProLon Professional, there's some interesting things. First of all, compliance, right? So getting people to do 3 cycles, it really isn't as difficult as you might think. It's only 5 days out of the month. It gives people a time to really focus on their health. There's a 71% compliance with 3 cycles of doing ProLon, which is, I think, is amazing. And I think it's part of it's because if you look to the right, it gets easier. Oh, excuse me. It gets easier each time. So people do experience some mild fatigue on their first cycle of the ProLon FMD. They go to the second cycle and they experience less. And you go to the third cycle and people experience less fatigue. Same thing with mild headaches, somewhere around 30% on cycle 1 and down around just under 20% or so on cycle 3. And then mild weakness also trends after each cycle. And remember, this isn't what they're experiencing for the full 90 days. This is just during the 5 days that they are implementing the fasting mimic diet, because they return to a normal diet the other 25 days of the month. So for ProLon Professional, it's 5 days a month for 90 days to 120 days, provides benefits of everyday heart healthy diet when done over a few months. So with 5 days out of the month, you get the same, or many of the same benefits, I should say, of an everyday heart healthy diet. So multiple 5-day cycles help patients in a variety of ways. One, it supports their metabolic health. I think you can see that by the residual benefit that was shown in the previous slide. It supports cardiovascular health as a part of a healthy lifestyle. It helps with weight loss, somewhere between 5 to 8 pounds, and it also helps with visceral fat reduction, which of course is our big concern because visceral fat is so metabolically active. It helps to reduce waist circumference, an average of 1.6 inches. I know a lot of people that would be really happy to lose 1.6 inches off their waist. It helps to preserve lean body mass. And then it supports healthy aging and cellular rejuvenation by triggering autophagy. So let's kind of talk about the tips and precautions that go with ProLon FMD. Who is ProLon for? If you're looking for weight loss, if you're looking for healthy aging, and if you're looking to just keep yourself in metabolic balance. You know, as we're aging, our body moves out of metabolic balance just because of the process of aging. So if you're really interested in how to maintain homeostasis and maintain metabolic balance, ProLon is for you. Do not use ProLon if you have an allergy to nuts, oats, sesame, or components of ProLon. And do not fast if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, if symptoms or treatment for an active infection or risk of a recurrent infection is in place, or if you are malnourished or underweight, a BMI under 18.5, and then also not for use in pediatrics, which is basically in individuals that are less than or equal to or less than 17 years old. So if we want to optimize the patient experience, it's just good to discuss these things. So fasting could contribute to the following. They could feel hunger, they could feel headaches, they could be fatigued, they may notice nausea, they could have difficulty concentrating or feeling cold. I have to say that I have to manage this very infrequently, and I've used this, in hundreds of situations at this point. But what to do if individuals experience this? What are your solutions? Getting light activity could help. Walking, stretching, yoga. Making sure that you get adequate rest. So during this period of 5 days, I think it's great to try to get people to understand this is their 5-day rejuvenation. Rest, light physical activity, hydrate yourself well. I would encourage 32 ounces of water at least when you're going through these 5 days. Obviously, I encourage that on everyone, that they should drink plenty of water. You could use 8 ounces of coffee per day if you're having caffeine withdrawal. And of course, if you need to use OTC medications to handle a headache or to handle nausea, that's understood. But of course, that's a last resort. So the impact on behavioral and emotional well-being. This is an incredible survey that was done. This is towards the end of the 5-day fast. Less food cravings once the fast was complete. 67% of individuals, improvement in mental clarity and focus. 62% greater energy levels, actually, at 61%. Motivated to adopt a healthier lifestyle, 89%. Look, if we're looking for a silver bullet to try to get people to switch on the thought process of adopting a healthier lifestyle because it's the right thing to do, this is fantastic data. More mindful of what they eat, 80% of the time. More control over their health, 77%. Establishing healthier eating habits, 70%. And I've found this to be true in practice as a clinician. And when I talk to individuals, people are more mindful of their portions, more mindful of making better choices. They see the benefit of incorporating the fasting mimic diet from ProLon into their lifestyle program. And of course, they have better portion control, just as I mentioned. They have less food cravings once their fast was complete, 67% of the time. They're able to resist sugary foods better. And there's an overall improvement in their energy. So these are incredible. I mean, when you think about that, if you set down a list to an individual and said, how many of these things would you like to improve in your life? Everyone would be checking the box on each of these benefits that occurred in emotional and behavioral well-being with the impact of fasting. So ProLon Professional, how do you use it? So if you think of it, does your patient have to have weight loss or metabolic health goals? The answer, yes. You go to the left, and that's kind of a reboot, and you think of 3 healthy aging protocol cycles: 1 month, 1 box for 5 days. And once again, I'm going to encourage you that the other 25 days, really give people good information on how to adopt healthier eating habits during those next 25 days. Of course, it gives them a little more flexibility by using the ProLon Fasting Mimic Diet because the 5 days really helps to reset and enhance metabolic health. Month 2, same thing, 1 box 5 days, 25 days of healthy eating preferably, and then box 3 the same. If you're more interested in additional weight loss, meaning more significant weight loss, or you have additional interest in really creating that in-depth metabolic health or homeostasis approach, you can think of doing another box during month 4 with another 25 days of healthy eating. Of course, did the patient achieve their goals in the first kickstart of that program? If they didn't, you can go across here to the right and see if they're on the healthy aging protocol, they can do 1 box in the next 1 to 3 months and then reassess it. If they did achieve their goals, just do 1 box every 3 to 6 months. Typically, what I found is if patients come in and they tell me when they want to do another box after they've achieved their goals, it's like, hey, I think I want to do another ProLon professional box. And what I would do is, if they haven't done one in several months, I make sure I mention it to them. Are you ready for another ProLon kit? And then, of course, if they had not achieved their goals on the metabolic health protocol, which is the protocol that's more geared towards additional weight loss and metabolic health, do another box for the next 1 to 2 months and then reassess. So they could go up to 6 months and then reassess where they're at with their individual situation. And of course, after that, they can move to 1 box every 3 to 6 months once they went through that first 4 to 6 month period. If you look at the top and you see to the right, where does your patient have weight loss or metabolic health goals, and they don't, but they're just wanting to participate, they're interested in fasting, you want to provide a scientific way to help them with fasting, but are concerned about doing a 5-day water fast, of course, they can do 1 box every 3 to 6 months in order to just retain their metabolic performance that they're currently at. So medication considerations, I'm going to read this disclaimer. The following non-exhaustive list is based on feedback from experienced medical professionals regarding the use of ProLon with patients using certain medications. ProLon has not been clinically tested with any drug or disease. There are no published clinical trials utilizing ProLon in combination with any medication or disease state. The following information is based on the feedback and opinions of healthcare professionals who are experienced and knowledgeable in the use of ProLon in a diverse patient population. The purpose of this information is to facilitate discussion of some of the more common safety concerns and real-world use cases of the product for general wellness purposes by healthcare practitioners, with the understanding that ProLon is not indicated for diagnosis, treatment, cure, or prevention of these medical conditions. Please note that each patient is unique and should be evaluated for his or her unique health needs by you, the healthcare professional, prior to recommending ProLon. Medication considerations: fasting may contribute to the following: hypoglycemia, so you may need to monitor and adjust any hypoglycemic agents. Electrolyte imbalances, dehydration or hypotension. Monitor and adjust any blood pressure meds as needed. Hormonal fluctuations, thyroid, sex hormone replacement, steroids, dependent on the individual. Always ensure the patient is on a stable regimen prior to fasting and using FMD. Medication considerations: as food, ProLon is not known to interfere with common medications such as statins, aspirin, other NSAIDs, PPIs, acetaminophen, or non-drowsy allergy medications. Precautions: FMD is not designed to diagnose, treat, or cure, or prevent any disease states. Each patient should be reviewed by the provider and medications continued for treatment purposes. Due to the restricted calorie nature of fasting and thus on the FMD meal program during the 5-day regimen, patients should drink at least 32 ounces of water to minimize the risk of dehydration, in addition to the fluids that are consumed by following the diet as instructed. So a minimum of 32 ounces. Motor vehicles, heavy machinery should not be operated with care until it's known how fasting can affect the individual. So probably on day one, it's best to find out, make sure you're notifying the patient, hey, make sure you feel good and alert and are fine in order to get behind the wheel of the car, or if you're operating any heavy machinery. Strenuous exercise and the exposure to high temperatures like saunas, spas, and jacuzzis, or cold temperature environments should be avoided during those 5 days. How does ProLon support health? Well, fasting affects every cell in the body. I think we've shown that at the beginning of the discussion. There's universal stress of food deprivation triggers self-preservation mechanisms, that's known as stress resistance, nourishes the body while keeping the body in the fasted state. That's what I think is so special about ProLon, is that it nourishes the body while keeping the body in that fasted state so it can trigger autophagy. It's distinct from the use of dietary supplements, and that FMD is actually activating a synergistic response to multiple mechanisms in your metabolism that trigger innate cellular stress resistance pathways. That's why it is so keen for metabolic health, because it activates so many different pathways. So I know I wanted to leave time for questions. To register or learn more, you can visit prolonpro.com. If you're new to ProLon, I'm going to invite you to, try this on your patients and on yourself. I've seen gratifying clinical results in some of my most resistant weight management cases, and people just report glowing results back to our clinic with the application of the ProLon Fasting Mimicking Diet. So do we have questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. That was great. A fantastic presentation. As always, you always do just honestly a tremendous job. And it looks like we have just a couple questions that are coming through. I do want to just make one little note, and it's just to say that some of the post hoc data that James had shared, just be aware that these are not primary outcomes. They are super exciting, and they're really great at hypothesis generating, but always to be mindful that the statistical analysis that was utilized within that trial, it wasn't powered to express their validity. So just take it, kind of with a grain of salt, in the sense that it's really exciting, and it's going to be, some of this really nice data that will help us to generate better hypotheses to come. So let me start with some of these questions that are out here, and it looks like, ooh, I'm getting quite a few. Sorry, let me just.
That's why I left. That's why I quit early. I kind of figured that.
This first one is, how can pharmacists utilize ProLon Pro? Typically, ProLon is done by MDs, DOs, NPs, and PAs. So I don't know if you want to take a stab at that.
Oh, sure. I'm more than happy to do that, because I teach pharmacists all the time. And of course, I'm a clinical pharmacist. And I think that pharmacists are playing a more important role and are in collaborative practices now, have collaborative practices rights. So they're writing prescriptions and they're writing for labs. So I think that pharmacists, once again, we're really good at asking questions to our patients. And so as long as the pharmacist is, tracking that patient and being on top of them, initiating this, they know the medications that the patient is on. They're not going to be adjusting those medications unless they're in communication with a physician. So they're obviously going to have to filter who they may recommend this to. But I see pharmacists as valuable healthcare professionals that, especially, and now that they're in kind of a, in some instances, a collaborative practice in many states, this is actually a perfect program for them to start to develop into their practices.
Excellent. And just to note, if you do hop onto the website ProLon Pro, when you register, you'll kind of see exactly who qualifies to be a ProLon provider. So feel free to check that out if you're ever at all kind of curious or not too sure. So the next question here is, when doing the FMD program, should the person reach ketosis, and should this be measured in the urine?
I'm going to give the Jim LaValle answer, and Victoria, you can give the El Nutra ProLon answer. I am not as concerned. That's not a primary endpoint for me. For me, the primary endpoint is, am I inducing autophagy and getting into the stress resistance mode where I'm really getting to clean up the waste products in the cells. So, do I need to measure ketosis? I do not. I think that it's providing a wide array, as I said in that last slide, it's providing multiple pathways and inputs of helping metabolic health. So I'm not as concerned about, is this reaching ketosis or not?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And truth be told, ketosis, it is kind of dependent on the individual. It's a bit of a case by case approach. And so if that's something that you're interested in, and if you did want to evaluate that with let's say a keto stick, then as long as it's in line with your care goals for the patient, then that's something that you definitely can do.
That's right.
But yeah, just as Jim was saying, there are quite a few different benefits to the FMD, even outside of just ketosis. That is a physiologic response to fasting, which is fantastic and really interesting, but not the only thing that happens. So great question, though. Here's another one. What are the ingredients that stimulate epigenetic pathways?
I think it's the quinoa. No, I'm going to take a stab at this, and Victoria, please, you may correct me.
Yeah.
I think that what you have to realize is that there was 20 years of research of looking at the macronutrients, so the macronutrients that were combined to allow the mimicking of fasting. For me, the magic is that by mimicking fasting, that's where we're getting that stress resistance effect, which is triggering the cleanup entourage that is allowing for that kind of cellular health. And so it's not, because we put 13 vegetables and 11 fats in this, that creates an epigenetic expression. It's more about the timing and the appropriate percentages of food that were and the correct types of food that were placed in the program that are creating the net effect.
Yeah, I definitely support that, and I concur. It's hard to say if indeed. Yeah, I know, absolutely, and it's a thing that everybody skips, right?
Right.
But nonetheless, you ask a really great question, and I think that in the future we will likely try to dive into some of these more molecular approaches to really understand what that molecular biology is of not only fasting, but of course also fasting mimicking diets. You're a little bit ahead of us right now, but I love it. And one day we'll get there. But at this point in time, that's not the current evidence that we have available. So it is to say there are definitely some things that happen with fasting and with fasting mimicking diet. Do we fully understand what some of these things are yet? No. But are we getting there? Yes. So excellent question. You're right on the money in terms of where we want to go kind of long term. So the next question here is, can you also describe these pathways? Oh, I think that was actually related to that first question, the epigenetic pathways. So I'll kind of just briefly mention. Of course, we don't have those ones yet. But again, excellent question. Okay, so next one down over. So a healthy 60-year-old female is on her 5th day and reports tenderness over her kidneys. She claims she's drinking enough water. She walks 40 minutes early morning and no other exercise. And I think that, that is it. That's, I think, the statement in a way.
Well,
I'm not too sure what the question was, but
I think what she's asking is what could be the cause if there's some tenderness over the kidneys. I mean, I would have no way of knowing that. I mean, when someone claims they're drinking enough water, I would want to be much more specific about, well, how much water is it that you're drinking? Because I think it is very important, especially if it's a 60-year-old who does 40 minutes of walking per day. I don't know if she lives in Arizona or Minnesota, right? So if she's in an area where she sweats a lot, it's going to be even more important to get over that 32-ounce piece, of getting that water in, and therefore maybe could feel a little bit of a tug on her kidneys. There's no reason for tenderness on her kidneys. It's an idiosyncratic complaint, right, that's being reported.
Yeah, and I definitely would concur with what you're saying here. It is really difficult to say exactly what might be going on with your patient specifically. Fasting, it does affect everyone uniquely and differently, and without, absolutely knowing all of this person's medical history and what they're doing and etc., it is really difficult to actually say. So
Right.
thank you for, reaching out and letting us know about that. I may actually reach out to you a little more just so I can, document that, but appreciate the comment. And I think we have a few more minutes here for maybe a couple questions, or maybe just one. So here's another one. Can you explain a little more detail on the diet when clients are not on FMD? So I think the question is what to do after FMD.
Well, you know what? There's a million opinions on diet, right? So I'm not going to espouse any one diet. I think that for one, in general, I love it when people eat lots of vegetables. Depending on whether or not you are, what your slant is, whether you're in favor of animal protein or not in favor of animal protein. I have people that come into me that are on plant-based diets, they're on paleo diets. My main concern with people is that they're trying to eat nutrient-dense foods, meaning, lots of vegetables, grass-fed beef, wild-caught fish, free-range chicken, making sure if they are including legumes, which I think are a great food, it's like get the quality of legumes and include the variety in that. We put what's called a modified low-carb anti-inflammatory diet. So in general, we try to have people eliminating when they can things like gluten and dairy to find out if they're reactive to them or not, and then we re-challenge them. But there's all sorts of ways. Some people, if you look at the longevity diet, Dr. Longo's book, that's there's a lot of folks that follow his longevity diet. A lot of people espouse ketogenic diets. My biggest concern is that when people take in very high saturated fat diets along with high sugar diets that are low in fiber and low in vegetables, and that's I could have a discussion on diet for the next 2 days and what the various nuances of each diet are and what they do and where they have shortfalls and for what genetic predisposition, whether you're an ApoE34, 44 or not. So, it's once again a little more complex than just but why just eat really healthy after that 25-day period. Lots of vegetables, don't overdo the carbs, and don't overdo the animal fats and proteins.
Great suggestion, great response. Truth be told, yeah, there is no real one size fits all, and it is kind of difficult to say what
Right.
Every single individual should do. I think that's actually where we're going kind of long term in this whole field of healthcare. We're trying to have this personalized approach. So we're getting there. We can generalize a few things like plant-based diet, and just in general trying to incorporate more kind of a colorful fruits and vegetables, or mainly vegetables, into the diet. But the jury is kind of out. It depends on the patient, depends on the case. So with that being said, we are pretty much out of time. Again, I thank you so much for your excellent presentation today, Jim. Really thankful that you're here and able to provide us with all this really great knowledge. And for those of you that we did not get to in terms of questions, don't worry. We will be able to address your questions, and we'll do so via email. So thank you again, and I hope that you all have a fantastic night.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.